So obviously Trump has won. I wasn't surprised. I don't know if any of you guys were surprised, but let's look at the election results. But Trump actually won the popular vote and the electoral college vote, which some would say a landslide. Some would say that's a slight exaggeration, but he got 72.5 million votes, which is 50.9% of the vote. In 2020, he got 74 million votes. So basically around the same thing. He held on to his coalition this year at 2024. I mean, the bigger news here is that Kamala Harris got 67.8 million votes, or maybe a little bit more now, since they didn't finish counting the votes when we got the statistic out. But she has actually lost 13 million votes for the Democrats since 2020. So that's like a huge margin. I think that's particularly significant. I, of course, was most interested to hear about how Jill Stein was going to do. And she only got over about 650,000 votes, which is only 0.5% of the popular vote. To give some sort of reference for that, in 2016, she got 1.5 million votes and over 1%. So that's the part that I really want to hear your insight on, Matt. But it's a two-part question because I'm sure people really care about how did Trump win? Matt, what's your takeaways on the election results? In your opinion, what brought Trump back to the White House? Your assessment of the Biden-Harris administration and how much of that contributed to his win. And of course, talk about Jill Stein a little bit. I mean, I was hoping that she could get to 5%. Considering the momentum she seemed to have going into the election, why didn't that translate to higher numbers for the Green Party? What do you think, Matt?
Yeah, all good questions, and thank you for having me on you. I think with what happened was the Democrats ran a candidate who was not a good candidate, just, in previous elections had not demonstrated the ability of what you would think of a national level candidate. They ran on a platform where many Americans are struggling right now. Over 60% of Americans are living paycheck to paycheck. And the Democratic response, every time people would turn on MSNBC or they'd open up the New York Times or the USA Today or whatever, the response would be, well, no, it's not that bad. You just don't really understand economics, right? So there is this separation from what people really experience with this talking down, this condensation that was reminiscent, I think, for 2016. Of how people were feeling coming out of the Obama years, where they were being told, look at the stock market, look how great the banks have rebounded. At the meantime, everyone had friends and family, it seemed like, who lost a home during that time. And then, of course, there was the issue of Gaza, the issue of the genocide. I mean, if you're going to fund and arm a genocide, you have to be prepared for the consequences. And so even though there's a lot of data out there that showed that if Harris had adopted a stronger stance, if she had said, I will condition arms sales to Israel based upon a ceasefire, that she would have won a lot more votes than she would have lost. And the Democrats knew this, and they chose not to follow that route. For them, it was their calculation, whether it's more important to stay in the good graces of the Israel lobby than to lose Arab American, Muslim American, and progressive votes in the millions. So I think in a snapshot, we can go more into detail if you want. That's kind of what I see as the three big points of the election. I'd say the corollary to the genocide aspect is that then you also went buddy-buddy with Liz Cheney. All right. So you really doubled down on who you were. I think Trump ran just a better campaign than Harris. He connected with people. He had essentially a story that people understood, a story of being up against the establishment, being up against the elites. Even though Trump is an elite himself, he's able to distance himself. And people felt heard when Donald Trump was talking. And I mean, however you feel about the man, you have to recognize that his campaigning was very good. And particularly when you juxtapose that to Harris's campaign, which again seemed to talk down to people or to ignore their actual problems. Now, the third party aspect, I think, is really troubling. And I think it's very disappointing for many people who were interested in seeing third parties and independents do better. And I think those who are involved in independent politics in the US really have to, just as the Democrats need to come out of this election and say, wow, what happened? What do we need? What do we need to do? What can we learn from this? The independents and third parties, because it wasn't just the Greens that underperformed, the Libertarians underperformed very badly. You mentioned that Stein got about 650,000 votes this election. In 2016. She got 1.5 million. Well, Chase Oliver, I think the Libertarian candidate, who's also an anti-war candidate, he got 500,000 votes. And in 2016, Gary Johnson got 4.5 million votes for the Libertarians. The Libertarians really underperformed in a way the Greens did as well. A lot of this has to do with people voting out of hate and fear for either Harris or Trump. And that tends to drive people away from independent choices. But a lot's got to do with money. And how can people know about choices if you're not able to get them in front of them? I mean, a lot to we can go into in that as well, as terms of the disappointment of the third party candidates, particularly anti-war candidates, because if you're not going to perform well in an election where you've got two of the most unfavorable, disliked candidates of all time running atop the incredibly disliked Democratic and Republican parties who are carrying out a genocide, and your anti-war candidates barely break 1 million votes total combined in the election, there's got to be some real soul searching and some really hard questions to be asked.